Corporate social responsibility, or CSR, is an international trend that started many decades ago and appeared in Vietnam recently as the country integrated into the global economy. According to the United Nations, CSR is defined as a human management approach to raise sustainability. The field is divided into 7 main topics, including the environment, labor practices, fair operating practices, consumer issues, organizational governance and human rights, community involvement and development. Experts say more and more Vietnamese businesses are paying attention to CSR for international economic integration. Yet, the implementation of CSR in Vietnam is still limited and often in the forms of donations and charity events. Local companies usually don't have long-term strategies to work with different stakeholders. In addition, many Vietnamese businesses neglect CSR to pursue their own short-term profits. The negligence has resulted in many issues such as environmental pollution, poor working conditions, lack of information transparency, among others. Those problems represent challenges for Vietnamese companies as the country is entering modern free trade agreements with strict requirements for corporate social responsibility and sustainable development. Hello and welcome to Sharing Vietnam. Social corporate responsibility is a relatively new concept in Vietnam, but it is attracting more and more attention as the country is rapidly integrating into the global economy. In our program today, we will explore this concept and the enhancement of social corporate responsibility in Vietnam to meet the requirements of the EU-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement. Our guest today is Mr. Gustav Dahlin, the Second Secretary in charge of Political and Trade Affairs of the Swedish Embassy in Hanoi. Hello, Mr. Dahlin. Thank you very much for joining us today. In your opinion, what is the importance of social corporate responsibility for businesses as well as for countries?
Well, I think, to the very extreme, I mean, if we want to have a continuous long-term growth, we are dependent on this planet and this world working. And as we can see very clearly, we are living under a heavy threat of climate change. And if we do not address that issue, then there won't be much of a world left in the future to make any kind of growth in. So that's the one aspect of it, that you need to view growth in a much broader sense than just the returns over the next quarter or something like that. So that's one of the things. Then another aspect is if you want to have a good CSR policy in your both as a company or as a country, and take all these things into account, you need to be more creative and innovative. You need to conduct business in a completely other new way, and that gives you a competitive edge in a world where technologies are evolving so fast all the time. And the third aspect, and perhaps the one that businesses is most sensitive to, is that in your home market, if you're a Swedish company in Sweden, you have customers who are very, very sensitive to these issues. If you're a clothing company and they buy clothes from you, or if you import agricultural products or wherever, they will hold you accountable to that. What you've bought overseas or what you produced overseas is in line with environmental standards, and when it comes to production, is produced in a way where the workers are not used or mistreated in any way and are paid fairly for what they do. And if you don't, then you will lose your customers and then you will lose your business. It's simple as that.
Well, social corporate responsibility is a relatively new concept in Vietnam. So what do you think of the progress and the shortcomings of Vietnamese businesses in fulfilling social corporate responsibility?
Of course, it is always a challenge because at the same time as you can acknowledge that these, making profit, continuing growth, and taking CSR concerns are not two opposing forces. Of course, adopting CSR standards or environmental labor standards, all those things, over the short term, it could be challenging for businesses and for growth. And so when you are an emerging economy and market such as Vietnam, and you're counting on and depending on maintaining the very, very high growth rate that the country has had for a very long time now, adopting this sort of mindset, of course, can be a challenge for fear of losing out on economic growth. But I think as recent events in the country has shown, those concerns need to be taken into account, at least when it comes to environmental issues. And it seems to be that that from what I hear, there is a growing realization that to ensure long-term and sustainable and inclusive growth, especially environmental concerns, need to be taken very, very seriously when you look at what kind of foreign direct investment you want to attract and what kind of businesses you want to have conducted in your country.
In December 2015, Vietnam and the European Union officially concluded negotiations on a free trade agreement known as EVFTA. The two sides pledged efforts to quickly complete necessary procedures so that the agreement could take effect at the start of 2018. It is considered a comprehensive and high-quality FTA with a whole chapter dedicated to sustainable development and corporate social responsibility. Accordingly, the two sides are committed to effectively enforce the International Labour Office's standards. Vietnam and the EU also pledged not to pursue trade and investment at the expense of requirements and effective implementation of domestic labour and environmental regulations. The chapter also includes commitments related to climate change, biodiversity protection, forest management and fishery. The two sides will develop mechanisms to boost the participation of social organizations in the implementation and strengthen transparency and accountability. Experts say Vietnam has a lot of work to do in raising awareness and capacity of local companies to meet the demand of the EU market, which requires products that are safe, friendly to the environment, and produced under decent working conditions.
Rất là nhiều doanh nghiệp Việt Nam cũng đã có được những cái chứng nhận quan trọng, thí dụ như chứng nhận BAB của Hoa Kỳ, hoặc là chứng nhận ASC của châu Âu, hoặc là thậm chí là một số các cái chứng nhận bán lẻ, kể cả các cái chứng nhận về vấn đề organic, rồi chưa kể đến các cái vấn đề liên quan đến nhiều cái tiêu chuẩn mà hiện nay họ cũng đang tiếp tục cho từng cái mặt hàng, trên cơ sở đặt nặng các cái vấn đề liên quan đến cái yếu tố về mặt trách nhiệm xã hội của các cái nhà sản xuất, không chỉ là đối với ông chế biến mà cả vấn đề người nuôi, trong cái quá trình để mà vận hành làm sao để nó tạo được những cái sự bền vững.
The EU is now the second biggest trade partner of Vietnam. The country's export to the EU has tripled over the last 5 years, reaching nearly $31 billion in 2015. Last year, the EU became the third biggest investor in Vietnam, up from the 6th position in 2014. European officials have expressed their belief that the FTA would boost bilateral trade and investment from the EU to Vietnam in accordance with sustainable development and corporate social responsibility goals. As far as I know, the EU-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement has very high quality requirements for social corporate responsibility. So could you give us more details on this aspect?
There is a very substantial chapter on sustainable development, and I know the free trade agreement has been hailed within the EU for being very, very ambitious, and of course that attests also to the Vietnamese ambition with having such a comprehensive agreement with this very solid chapter on sustainable development, and it outlines a lot of issues that has to do with sustainable development, not least then labor issues and environmental concerns, giving reference to all, I would say, major UN conventions on when it comes to addressing environmental concerns, climate change issues, deforestation, things like that. And on the labor side, a requirement that all the core ILO conventions must be ratified and complied with.
Could you give us some information on the support of Sweden for Vietnam to enhance social corporate responsibility here?
Now the European Union delegation has quite recently issued a very comprehensive fact book about the agreement, and they are working on an action plan together with the Vietnamese government on what support can be given by the EU to Vietnam over the coming 2 years to provide for a good and efficient implementation of the agreement.
Okay.
I mean, we will contribute in any way we can in this work that the European Union as a whole will do when it comes to supporting Vietnam. And I think the issue of sustainable development and especially CSR and industrial relations issues is sort of a natural field where we can contribute, and we already have to some extent. We had this spring we had a seminar that we organized together with the Vietnamese Chamber of Commerce and Industry down in Ho Chi Minh, where we had speakers coming in from Sweden, representatives of Swedish and Vietnamese companies, and also a representative of a Swedish labor union to come and talk about how labor unions who have a very, very long tradition in Sweden, and from where our current Prime Minister comes actually, how they work in Sweden and how they contribute to maintaining good industrial relations between employers and employees, and also to the overall performance of Swedish businesses and economy. So we've had that. We also had our National Board of Trade was here in Vietnam, both in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh during the spring, to inform Vietnamese businesses in general about exporting to Sweden, but very, very much focused on how it will be under new FTA, and especially what you need to comply with on the sustainable development CSR side. And they are of service actually not only when they were here, but every day of the year.
Mr. Dalin, thank you very much for joining us today and providing very significant insights.
Thank you.
Well, that's all of our Sharing Vietnam today. Hopefully, with the active support of Sweden and other partners, social corporate responsibility in Vietnam will soon be strengthened in order to meet the requirements of modern FTAs and to ensure sustainable development for the country. Thank you so much for watching, and see you again next time.